Hello and welcome. This is Deep Dive and I'm Tiffany Meier. President Trump released a 46-minute speech Wednesday afternoon. Let's unpack it a bit. He started off with a bold statement by saying, "This may be the most important speech I've ever made." Throughout the speech, he went into detail about the variety of fraud seen so far in this election process. He concluded the speech by saying, quote, "Very many smart people have congratulated me on all we've done."
The biggest tax cuts in history, regulation cuts, the biggest in history. We rebuilt our military. We took care of our vets like never before. Space Force, and so much more. But then they went on to say, as big and as important as these events were, the single greatest achievement in your presidency will be exactly what you're doing right now, voter integrity for our nation. It's more important than any of the things that we discussed. If we don't root out the fraud, the tremendous and horrible fraud that's taken place in our 2020 election, we don't have a country anymore. So with the resolve and support of the American people, we will restore honesty and integrity to our elections, and we will restore trust in our system of government. Thank you, God bless you, and God bless America.
On the surface, it seems Trump is speaking directly to the American people, detailing election fraud and why it's shaken up the U.S. right now. But it can also be seen as a declaration of war, showing Trump's determination to fight the election fraud. At the same time, it can also be seen as a proclamation telling the current Republican establishment either stand with President Trump and fight to save America or stand against him and the people. There are many legal teams now seeking justice for the entire U.S. election. We know that President Trump himself has a legal team led by Giuliani and Ellis. Powell and Lin Wood have a legal team that is currently filing lawsuits in Georgia and other states. And there is a law firm called Amistad Project of the Thomas More Society. It is a group of conservative attorneys who are also filing lawsuits in 6 key swing states. They held a press conference on Tuesday with 3 whistleblowers. This group of lawyers outlined a critical aspect of election fraud. Let's go back to election night. Trump was leading in both Wisconsin and Michigan by a relatively wide margin. But that all changed when at 4 a.m. in Wisconsin and 6 a.m. in Michigan, there was a massive jump in the Biden vote. As a direct result, Trump was narrowly trailing in both states. The jump was an instantaneous injection of hundreds of thousands of Biden votes. We learned that the generation of these hundreds of thousands of ballots was not a simple process, because the ballot, especially the mail-in ballot, first has to be filled in, put in the first envelope, signed, put into the second envelope, and then labeled with a return address. It's a huge project, and not everyone can do it in a second or two, and it's all handwritten, so it's a systematic project. It's not just in Wisconsin or Michigan, and it's hundreds of thousands or probably even millions of problematic ballots in the end. Such a huge number requires a huge effort, and there's no way that something like this could be done by just a few people sitting at home. Also, it seems unlikely such a large amount of return addresses and names would surface all at once. It has to be a systematic process. In Amistad Project's news conference, they gave a big picture of the fraud. According to the project, there is a way to explain the process of generating hundreds of thousands of fake ballots. Let's unpack it. To sum it up, there are 4 core steps that form the process of getting hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of fraudulent ballots into the voting system, based on the information provided in the press conference. The first step is to open the door, if you will, to this fraudulent system, using the COVID-19 pandemic as an excuse. Many states have used the pandemic as a reason to change many of their election rules before the election, sometimes illegally, such as allowing the massive use of mail-in ballots and absentee ballots with fewer restrictions. Also, previously, the ballots were counted within each precinct and then were reported to the state. This time in some areas, we have the consolidation of counting centers. In Philadelphia or Detroit, for example, there are large counting centers. This is actually contrary to the management of COVID-19. Because of the pandemic, it's considered not safe for many people to be in the same room with only a certain distance among them. It would have been better to have smaller groups of people to count ballots. But somehow this way of consolidation of counting centers was approved, and for the first time implemented in some states. The core reason is very likely to make it easy to inject a large number of ballots in a short period of time into these large counting centers. It is hard to inject a lot of ballots to each precinct if the ballots were counted separately, because there are only so many people in that area and you have to transport the ballots to every precinct. Also, this time, ballot boxes were adopted. This makes it easy for people to collect ballots and then to drop them off into the boxes. This falls under ballot harvesting, and it is illegal in many states. We've also learned that the ballot signature requirements were loosened in many places. This seems to point to a convenient environment for election fraud. So in the second step, these fake voters have to have a name and an address. So how are these names and addresses generated? In this press conference, it was shown that it's very easy to produce them because there are a lot of personal information databases and election information databases that can be purchased or downloaded from the internet. It was found that a covert database was generated in every state. In this database, each person really has the address and even the name that had appeared in the state's historical documents, but that person is really a fake voter. For example, there is a witness who has given a sworn affidavit. She currently lives in Virginia, but she grew up in Michigan. She went by the name Annie Biles in Michigan until she was about 18 years old. She never registered to vote under this name. Then she changed her name to Rena. Later, she moved to Virginia. But when she recently checked the status about her old name in Michigan, she found out that her old name had been used to register for vote, and whoever registered that old name did indeed vote. In some cases, there appear to be dead people voting. But overall, the so-called dead people vote is only a small part. The third step would be to find a group of people who are dedicated to filling out the ballots with the false names and addresses provided. This is a huge project, but it's also the hardest part to catch, because the people doing it must have known they are committing a crime, so these people would not admit anything. The fourth step is to take the hundreds of thousands of such ballots that were created and ship them in bulk to the states. Then, at the appropriate time, when it is needed, inject them into the vote counts. This step can be done most conveniently by the U.S. Postal Service. In the Amistad Project press conference, two whistleblowers said there is an anti-Trump tendency in the U.S. Postal Service, like how in the Justice Department, 85% of political donations are from the Democratic Party. First, the fake ballots have to be transported to each swing state from the centralized places where they are generated. A whistleblower named Jesse Morgan testified. He is from Lancaster, Pennsylvania. He normally drives a tractor trailer from Lancaster to Bethpage, New York, where he sends the Lancaster mail to New York and then loads the Bethpage mail into his trailer. He then drives to Harrisburg, the capital of Pennsylvania, unloads the mail for Harrisburg, and then drives back to Lancaster, where the remaining mail is unloaded. This is a daily routine. He starts his day at 1 a.m. The driving time of that route is over 7.5 hours, so it is easily a workday of around 10 hours. But he said his routine was changed on October 21st. That's more than 10 days before the actual November 3rd election day. Like before, he drove from Lancaster to Bethpage, New York, to a distribution center of the U.S. Postal Service. However, on that day, there were 24 large boxes or gaylords of completed ballots with return addresses that were loaded into his trailer. He was asked to ship 24 gaylords of completed ballots to Harrisburg, the capital of Pennsylvania. It was estimated later that the 24 gaylords could hold about 200,000 ballots. It could be illegal to ship this many completed ballots across state lines because, even if it is a mail-in ballot, except for a very limited number of military ballots, you only allow people living in a certain state to vote in the state, so there should not be such a huge amount of mail-in ballots interstate. This could be a breach of the law by the Postal Service. At the same time, Jesse didn't think much of it. He drove these about 200,000 completed ballots from Bethpage, New York to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, where he waited for 6 hours, which never happened before. No one came to unload the shipment. Later, a transportation supervisor for the USPS spoke directly to him. The officials in this rank usually spoke to his boss instead of a driver like Jesse. He told Jesse to drive to Lancaster without unloading in Harrisburg. Jesse felt it was strange. He said in the press conference, "This made no sense to me. I knew the ballots were loaded for Harrisburg and that if I was to go to Lancaster, they would have to unload the ballots in Lancaster to take off Lancaster's stuff, to put the ballots back in the trailer, then send them back to Harrisburg. Doesn't make no sense. This was a real screw up in my thinking." The next day, when he arrived at Lancaster's USPS facility, his trailer was gone. That was the trailer he always used since he started working for his company. The trailer, loaded with 200,000 completed ballots, was gone. Thinking back, Jesse felt the whole situation was too weird to be a coincidence, so he decided to speak up. Some say this could be how fake ballots were transported in bulk. Another whistleblower, Nathan Pease, spoke about how these ballots ended up in the vote count. Nathan's job was to go to various places every day to collect the mail and then take it to UWS, a contracted sorting center. In this center, the mail gets sorted and metered, and all the ballots are put in special ballot bins that are marked for ballots only. Then he would take the sorted mail and ballots in his truck and deliver to the USPS center. This is a process that he does every day. And he paid special attention to the ballot bins because one time he forgot to retrieve the ballots for transportation and he had to drive back for them. Nathan said in his testimony, "On November 2nd, 2020, I noticed that there was only one ballot in the bin for delivery to USPS.
And on November 3rd, Election Day, there were no ballots in the bin for delivery." One can imagine my surprise then when the next day, November 4th, I was asked by a senior USPS employee named Monte if I had forgotten any ballots the night before. Monte explained that an order came down from the Wisconsin-Illinois chapter of USPS that 100,000 ballots were missing. Monte then told me that his post office had dispatched employees to look for the missing ballots around 4 a.m., and that only 7 or 8 were found at UMS. Based on my previous experience and habit of double-checking for ballots, I believe that to be a lie. The following day, November 5th, 2020, I had a conversation with a different USPS named Rachel, in which she admitted that USPS employees were ordered to backdate ballots that were received too late to be lawfully counted. I asked Rachel if I would get in trouble with my boss for those ballots the other night, referring to the allegedly missing ballots I discussed with USPS employee Monte on November 4th, 2020. "No, you wouldn't," she responded, "as long as they were postmarked for the 3rd. She continued, "That's why they had us do that." I didn't bring any of this to the attention of my supervisors at USPS at the time due to what I perceived to be their hostility towards President Donald Trump and their evident contempt for the law. I heard those same 2 post office employees making jokes about taking mail-in ballots for Trump and throwing them away. I'm not a Trump supporter. I'm not a Biden supporter either. In fact, I didn't vote for either of the main candidates. But something profoundly wrong occurred in Wisconsin during the presidential election, and the American people have a right to know about it.
As these whistleblowers testified, a picture started to form. It's like a highly coordinated organized crime, blatant fraud to overthrow Trump. The spokesperson for Amistad Project indicated in the press conference that they have other evidence to corroborate the whistleblowers' testimonies, and they have turned it over to federal and local law enforcement. More and more witnesses are coming out, saying they saw corruption, such as in the hearings in Arizona and Michigan. Now, there's been some talk about a secret weapon. For example, there's talk about a server in Germany that seems to have been obtained by the U.S. military. Not many details about that have been confirmed by President Trump or his legal team. But it seems dangerous to pin all one's hope in a single secret weapon. Jenna Ellis, an attorney in President Trump's legal team, recently tweeted a few sentences about her thoughts. She said, quote, "There isn't any such thing as the wrong side of history. History is written by the victors. Imagine what history would write about our founders. Had they not won the Revolutionary War, that wouldn't have made their effort any less a worthy endeavor. The standard is always truth. She continued, truth is the person of God, 1 John 1. Always pursue truth and therefore pursue God. Thanks for tuning in to Deep Dive. Let me know what you think down below. I'm Tiffany Meier, and see you soon.